Conversations with Niki is brought to you by studyapps.co.za, South Africa's leading education app for tablets. And welcome to yet another interesting conversation. I'm Niki Seberini. So pleased to be with you. Thank you for tuning in. Of course, this is the show that keeps you entertained, informed, and inspired. I'd like to welcome our syndication partner listeners. Of course, that is Radio Today. That is also in the Northern Cape, Timoning Stereo 89.1, Eldo's FM, Chai FM, Kawi FM, West Coast FM, MC 90.3 FM in Plettenberg Bay, Knysna FM, Wild Coast FM, and Bay FM. I hope that you are enjoying the show. Thanks for the emails, thanks for the tweets, thanks for all the contact. It's great to hear from you. It's lovely to hear what you're enjoying. I had so many people responding to the tribute that we paid to Dr. Maya Angelou last week. I'm really glad that you enjoyed that. And please do keep those emails coming in and letting me know what kind of shows you want to be listening to. So I'm just going to direct you to that website again. It's www.conversationswithniki, one word, Niki spelled Niki.co.za. Now, all the shows are there. So if there are shows that you've missed in the past, just go along to that website and scroll down, and there may be some shows that you'll be interested in listening to. They are all there. And if you do have to leave this conversation, this very, very, very interesting conversation that we're going to have today, no problem. I will be posting it on the website within the next couple of days. You can follow me on Twitter at Seberini is my handle. Seberini, Seberini, and also you can go to my Facebook page, Conversations with Niki, and all the latest information is also posted on that page. So, I don't know. I think we're just experiencing a lot of cold weather around South Africa. I've been looking at people posting all sorts of pictures on Facebook and snowy mountains in the Eastern Cape and strong winds, and in Joburg. It's just cold, and everyone seems to be so shocked and surprised. And I suppose we as South Africans just have to get our head around the fact that it's winter. And, when it's winter, the temperatures drop. Not to say that I love it, but something else that we need to look at when we look at the month of June here in South Africa, because it really is an incredibly significant month for us, because we commemorate two very important events that took place in our history. The first being the Soweto uprising, which we know as Youth Day, and we're also going to be looking at something that was very, very significant in our history, and that is 50 years ago, on Friday the 12th of June 1964, 8 men stood in the dock in the Palace of Justice in Pretoria awaiting their sentence, and that was on sabotage charges. Now, the men were Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, Govan Mbeki, Raymond Mhlamba, Dennis Goldberg, Ahmed Kathrada, Andrew Mhlangeni, and Elias Motsaledi, and also Lionel Rusty Bernstein, who we know was later acquitted. And I'm looking up at my guest because he really knows everything, and I'm scared that I have some wrong facts here, and I know that Nick Wolpe is going to set me straight, so that I'm looking forward to. Now, they were all expected to be sentenced to death for their role in the African National Congress armed struggle, and we know, obviously, these trials as the Rivonia trial. So we're going to be talking about the Rivonia trials today, but we're going to rewind a little bit, and we're going to look at Lily's Leaf Farm. Lily's Leaf Farm being this farm in Rivonia, which the police raided on July the 11th, 1963. I believe it looked like a delivery truck arriving, which was filled with security, the special forces, and I believe 19 or 20 people were arrested. But I have the expert in the studio. He has obviously a very close association with Lily's Leaf Farm. He spent a lot of his life there and experiencing firsthand what happened. So I'd like to welcome Nick Wolpe, founder and chief executive officer of Lily's Leaf Trust, here into the studio. So hi, Nick, welcome. I really am a little bit nervous, I have to tell you. Do I have all my facts straight?
Firstly, thanks for having me on your show,
Thank
Nikki.
you for coming on.
My pleasure. Yes and no. But that is not a problem, because, if I can just start off by saying that's one of the problems that we face in South Africa today, is either our history has and is beginning to fade from the historical landscape and people are not aware, and secondly, we have a tendency as South Africans, and I'm sure also around the world, but tendency in South Africa not to know our facts and not to make sure. I mean, despite the number of times I correct people about the fact that it was not the Rivonia treason trial, but the Rivonia trial, there was a separate trial, which was the treason trial of 56 to 61. The Rivonia trial was a trial based on sabotage, because there is a subtle difference. Treason carries one penalty, and that is death. The new General Amendment Act, which they introduced shortly before the Rivonia trial, they were able to charge them with sabotage, which the ultimate sentence was death. So the judge had an element of flexibility. And that really is also a very important thing to realize, because while you said the prospect of death, of being sentenced to death, hung over them, there was always that slim chance that the judge would find them or would not impose the death penalty. And it's quite interesting listening to Andrew Mulungeni the other day talking on the events. He said that if they were not going to be sentenced to death, there was this slim hope that some of them would get short sentences, like 12 years, because there wasn't sufficient evidence against them. And others may be acquitted or get life imprisonment. They suspected, though, that Nelson and Walter would be sentenced to death. So the reality was there was still an element of uncertainty underpinning the verdict, even though there was this expectation or thought that they would be given the death sentence. There was hope. So, there is a lot of very interesting facts regarding the Rivonia trial, particularly around the sentencing.
It is a bit strange, though, and disconcerting that there are so many blurred areas. I mean, I had Sam from the Nelson Mandela Foundation sitting exactly where you are a week ago, and she was saying still today they're getting more accurate information on Nelson Mandela about when his father left. It was not at the age of 12, I think she said. It was in fact at the age of 9, and so many people had reported and written about that particular age. So who is actually responsible for ensuring that the right facts are going out there?
Well, I think there are two aspects to this. I think on the one hand, I mean, when you have a liberation struggle, you don't sit there and start recording the information because that information could come back to bite you. It could be used against you. I mean, an example, the formation of MK. Now, they don't know where it was conceived. They say that it's conceived in a field, but I've heard here in what was the Transvaal at the time, and in Natal. So no one knows actually where it was conceived. We do know that in 2002 the ANC said the birth of MK took place at Liliesleaf. So we do know that as a fact. But where it was finally agreed to is unclear. Another interesting aspect is the Freedom Charter. The Freedom Charter was drawn up in 56, but it took 5 years for it to be signed, between 1956 and 1961. We don't really know why it took 5 years. We have certain assumptions and there's some speculation. But one of the problems is that those who know, unfortunately a lot of them have passed away. The memories have become frail. And there is no documentary evidence. There is, in some respects, some documentary evidence, but we deal a lot of the time with the fact that we rely on those who are still alive, their memoirs. But what I've also find quite interesting is that their memoirs are slightly different to when they are giving oral, I don't want to say evidence, but oral accounts. And I suppose it's more humanistic in terms of the oral account as opposed to writing it. And then you are restricted by the number of words, and editors cut down and reshape it. So one of the things which we are finding in South Africa today is that where is the documentary evidence? I mean, another problem is that the old regime destroyed a lot of it.
Oh, really?
Some of it is in private hands, and some of it has never been captured. And it's that which creates part of the problem. And on top of it, there is also amongst some individuals a reluctance to talk, which is very interesting and disconcerting on the one level.
So, well, let's look at the first thing, because when you first sat down off air, I spoke about Lily's Leaf Farm, and I said that your father, Harold Wolpe, co-owned Lily's Leaf Farm, and you said, well, that's not correct at all.
Correct. I mean, there are a number of assumptions made regarding Lily's Leaf. I mean, one of them is, again, that Nelson was arrested at Lily's Leaf. He wasn't. His papers and diaries were found there.
And he lived there for years?
No, not years.
Not years?
No, not years. He moved in October of 61 and left in January of 62 to go on his African mission, and then returned to Lily's Leaf. And then from Lily's Leaf, he went to brief Chief Luthuli, and when he was returning to Johannesburg, that's when he was arrested.
Okay.
I mean, so, yes, I mean, there is that incorrect fact that my father and Arthur Goldreich owned Lily's Leaf. The reality was that's incorrect. My father was the lawyer that did the legal purchase. The money to purchase Lily's Leaf came via Moscow through Zurich into my uncle's trust account. The farm was actually owned by a front company for the Communist Party called Navian Pty Limited, and one of the directors was the only director was Vivian Ezra. And we didn't even realize that at the outset, because when we started the project, our biggest concern was that there would be nothing to Lily's Leaf other than the fact of the raid, and that we have over the years coined the phrase Lily's Leaf uncovered, and we're beginning to get more and more information. But one of the other aspects is there are differing opinions. If I give another example, we interviewed Brian Woodlake. Now, Brian Woodlake interviewed Nelson in 1961. It was the most seminal interview that Nelson, I believe, has ever done, because it was during the course of that interview he gave a clear indication that the collective had decided to move away from passive resistance to armed struggle. Now, Brian Woodlake gave an account of how the interview came about and what subsequently transpired. And in fact, Ahmed Kathadra, when he got the transcript, said he doesn't recall it happening that way. He had a completely different perspective or memory of how things unravel. So when you're relying on human memory, you're going to get differing opinions for a particular event. So we deal with that as well, because each person has a recollection. And of course, over the years, our memories fray, they become blurred, and we then start to put maybe a possible different interpretation on an event. So Navian Pty Limited owned the property, and in fact sold the property shortly afterwards in the summer of 63-64 to a Mr. Schernitz, who bought it as a betrothment gift to his girlfriend, a former Miss South Africa at the time, Denise Littler. And they never got married, and he took the property back. But he also enjoyed collecting cars, so he turned one of the outhouse buildings into a garage. So that's why we have lost a lot of the original brickwork of one of those buildings, because he actually turned it into a garage, and we kept one of the driveways that we uncovered during the archaeological excavation.
So, Nick, did you grow up on that farm?
No.
Not at all?
Not at all.
Really?
You see, and it's interesting because someone sent me an email.
I had visions of you, because I know Nelson Mandela, went by the name of David when he was on the farm. Yeah. I'm saying this is what I've read, and he was the supposed gardener.
Correct.
or labourer on the farm, and everyone called him David. Yes. Is that right?
That is right.
Okay. I had visions of, you on David's shoulders running around the garden.
I wish. Anyway, I was too young at the time. But it's interesting because I got an email from someone recently who said, I'm looking forward to hearing your stories of your time on the farm. So I wrote back and said, unfortunately, you've got the wrong Nicholas. It was actually Nicholas Goldreich who lived on the farm, because it was the Goldreich. So Arthur and Hazel, who fronted...
So they lived on the farm.
Fronted as white owners, and they paid R100 a month rental to Navian Pty Limited. So they had two children, Paul and Nicholas. Now, you made reference to Nelson taking the name David Motsamaya. Now, you know what Motsamaya in the vernacular means?
No.
It means to move, to go, to be on the run.
Okay.
Now, Nelson was referred as the Black Pimpernel. There was the Scarlet Pimpernel. Now you see him, now you don't. So we're just wondering whether he actually took the surname deliberately to kind of coincide with matching his how they had branded him as the Black Pimpernel.
I'd like to believe that.
Yeah.
That just adds something
So
very special.
And Arthur Goldreich tells a wonderful story of them standing outside the front door on the lawn, and Nicholas Goldreich walks out one morning with Drum magazine. And he walks up to Nelson, and he looks at Nelson, Arthur says, and points to him and says, "You are not David Motzer-Meyer." Opens the magazine, and to the shock and horror of everyone standing there, he says, "You're Nelson Mandela." So this 9-year-old...
Quickly, shut up the kid.
Yes, this 9-year-old, Arthur says, blows the cover wide open of Nelson, and Nelson takes him off for a walk down to the vegetable garden and back up. And after that time, he never referred to him as Nelson. He only referred to him as David Motzer-Meyer. So there are some fascinating stories, unique stories around Lily's Leaf and its importance in the liberation struggle. But what also makes it such an interesting, unique site, apart from the political role it played, and we mustn't lose sight of the important political role it played, is the fact that there are a lot of humanistic stories. And furthermore, it has stories which connect us to, for example, the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. Lily's Leaf...
What is the connection?
The connection is a gentleman by the name of Tom Rayner. Tom Rayner, who at the time had just been appointed the vice consulate to the US Embassy in New Delhi, and he went to the Purbula, and that's where Mahatma Gandhi gave his daily prayers, and he was standing next to Mahatma Gandhi's assassin and apprehended him. He reappears in Rivonia in 1961, dating a woman by the name of Cornelia Bagshaw, whose son went to the same school as the Goldreichs. And now we interviewed her
connection, wow.
We interviewed her several years ago, and she said he was clearly CIA because he had so much interest in what was going on at Lily's Leaf Farm. We're also linked to NASA, the space station. And this is why we coined it Lily's Leaf Uncovered. All these wonderful stories that evolved. But I think one of the aspects which I'd like to say and stress is if you want to understand the Rivonia trial and how they landed up at Robben Island, you must go to Lily's Leaf, because Lily's Leaf led to the Rivonia trial in the sense of all the documentary evidence that was presented at the trial was found at Lily's Leaf.
Because wasn't Nelson Mandela already arrested when the others were arrested?
Correct.
But it was on a lesser charge, and it was based on the documents that they found at Lily's Leaf. Am I right?
Wrong. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
He was charged for inciting. He was charged for leaving the country illegally under a false passport and for inciting the stayaways, which he got 5 years for. While he was in prison, he asked his lawyers, Bob Heppel and Joe Slover, but he represented himself at that original trial. But Bob Heppel and Joe Slovo were there to assist him. While on one occasion he asked Bob and Joe to have his documents removed and destroyed. So his diary of his African mission and various other documents, one being that he was editing, and that was How to Be a Good Communist. And I think that's part of the reason that some people think that he was a communist. There were other aspects linked to that. And they decided that these documents were too invaluable and too important to destroy.
So they didn't destroy them.
So they gave the responsibility to Arthur Goldreich to hide. And Arthur describes how he looked at a number of alternatives and eventually decided that he would bury the documents in the coal shed. And on the day of the raid, they made a beeline to the coal shed, uncovered the documents, and that is why they were enabled.
How did they know the coal shed?
Well, apparently they noticed that the coal was slightly at an angle, and they thought that was slightly suspicious, because apparently the coal went level and then dropped. So one of them thought that looked unusual, so fortuitously, we believe, some people think they were tipped off, fortuitously they started to dig in the coal shed,
and they found the
they found the box with the documents, and that was what enabled them to bring Nelson as accused number one to the Rivonia trial, because it directly linked him to the activities of Lily's Leaf.
I see. Fascinating. And people can come along and visit Lily's Leaf. I mean, I've been there once, broadcast from Lily's Leaf. It was a wonderful experience. Tell me about this coin that I'm holding in my hand.
Okay, that coin is a part of a series of coins that we've been releasing over the years, because, Niki, I think one of the problems that we are facing, and I mentioned this briefly to you off air, was that we are slowly but surely seeing our history of our liberation struggle, and I don't believe just our history of our liberation struggle, but our history in general, fading away. The historical narrative of what makes South Africa today is slowly disappearing. We don't talk about history. We don't talk about the past. To a large extent, we raise eyebrows. Now, we've launched these coins as a way of memorializing and immortalizing these events, but also ensuring that running parallel to them is the narrative. Now, what you're holding in your hand is the coin of the Rivonia 10 to mark, commemorate, and remember the trialists and the sentencing. And when I say to mark and commemorate, it's not about them being imprisoned. It is about what underpinned and resulted in them being imprisoned, what they stood for, what they were struggling for, what they were committed to, the belief of a free, democratic South Africa where all South Africans were judged, and I would like to paraphrase Martin Luther King, were judged not by the color of the skin, but by their character and their morality, which is a very big difference. And that coin is part of the series to ensure that what these individuals underwent and did is remembered through that coin.
It's a beautiful coin. And this is the first of a series. How many have you already released of these coins?
It hasn't yet been released. It was actually released on Tuesday evening.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, well, we're going to continue with the story because it is 50 years. But I do have one of the Rivonia trialists on the line, and we're delighted because I know that he's very, very busy. He's got two important events taking place today. So we're so delighted that Ahmed Mohamed Kathrada, who is a South African politician, former political prisoner and anti-apartheid activist, on the line just to share his stories with us. Ahmed, thank you very, very much for joining us.
Thank you for having us, and thank you to the listeners.
I have Nick Wolpe in the studio. We're talking about Lily's Leaf Farm. We're talking about the day when everyone was arrested. Perhaps you can just, from your perspective, Ahmed, maybe you can just tell us what that experience was like for you.
You mean about the arrest itself?
The actual arrest, yes.
Yeah. Well, I was disguised at that moment, at that time, so I arrived at Lily's Leaf the night before, because I was not yet comfortable in my disguise, so I had to travel at night for this meeting. And of course, I suppose you've already been told, the meeting started to discuss a controversial document, a document called Operation Bayabuya, which was going to take the struggle to the next phase. And the next phase simply meant armed combat. So that was supposed to be under discussion on the 11th of July. And the document was on the table when this, I think it was a laundry van or some such thing, pulled up. We didn't take notice of it because that was quite a normal thing until the police jumped out from the back.
And what did you think when you saw these police?
Well,
and what was your first thought?
We were shocked because we thought we were very secure. Although I stayed there for a few months, and I was disturbed about the I wouldn't say complete lack of security, but there were some violations of security. In other words, bringing people to Lilies Leaf without going through the procedure, which was a violation of security. So I was a bit concerned about it, but not to the extent where I thought the police would come to find out, which eventually happened.
I've read a quote, but maybe it's not correct, that the police made the statement, "We've hit the jackpot," after they had made the arrests.
I've heard that as well. It certainly, I can't remember hearing this myself. I thought they mentioned this to Dennis Goldberg, but he's not so sure either.
Now, you, according to what I've read, you only got to see your lawyers apparently 2 days before the indictment. Leading the defense team, Bram Fisher, there was Joel Joffe, Arthur Chaskelson, George Bezos, Vernon Beranga, and Beranger, thank you, and Harold Hansen. And there was a separate team, including Hansen and Harry Schwartz, who defended Cantor. Perhaps you can tell me, Ahmed, leading up to the trial, were you able to see one another? Were you able to discuss what you were going to say or what was going to happen in the trial? What was it like in the build-up?
Well, I suppose you know already about the 90-day detention.
We haven't mentioned it, Ned, no?
Oh, you see, there was this law which allowed the police to detain political suspects for 90 days at a time, where no lawyers allowed, no visitors, no books, no newspapers, not even allowed to talk to people with whom you were arrested. Now that was not at that stage anything to do with the trial, or so we thought. The only visitors I'll talk about myself. The only visitor I received were the police. And they just came with one message, gives us, in my case, 2 pieces of information, otherwise you're going to hang. That was the occasion on which they visited me. That was the message. Give us this 2 pieces of information, otherwise you're hanged.
And how did you feel about that? Standing up for what you believe in, fighting for what you believed in. Were you prepared to? I mean, we've got the very famous words of Nelson Mandela, which we'll play. But were you, in your personal capacity, were you prepared to die for this cause?
Well, I tell you, to my interrogator, Major Swanepoel, I recited an Afrikaans poem to him.
What was that?
Ek hou van 'n man wat sy man kan staan. Ek hou van 'n arm wat 'n slag kan slaan. 'n oog wat nie wyk wat 'n baas kan kyk. En 'n wil wat so vas as 'n klipsteen staan. So I recited it to him. I said, this is written by a well-known Afrikaans poet. Are you as an Afrikaner now asking me to turn traitor, to betray my people, which I'm not prepared to do.
And what did he say?
No, well, Swanepoel was known as a murderer. In my case, there was absolutely no physical torture. He just threatened, but there was absolutely no physical violence against me.
And Ahmed, we know the trial. We've seen the trial. We've seen many documentaries. What stands out for you the most when you think back on that trial?
Well, obviously, before the sentence, of course, what stood out most was Madiba's address to court. But the second thing that stands out, of course, which turned out to be the more relevant one, was contrary to the expectation of accused and lawyers, which was a death sentence, when the judge said life imprisonment. Now, he was so soft when he said life. I personally didn't hear it until I heard Dennis Goldberg shouting across to some member of his family his life. And of course there was a sigh of relief that we were not going to hang.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about that feeling a little bit more, Ahmed. We're going to take a very quick break, and we will be back. We're going to keep you for 5 more minutes, if that's okay. Please do stay with us. Thank you.
Hi, my name is S.V. Prinsloo, and I'm the HOD of IT Integration at Bridwin Preparatory School in Melrose. We started using study apps about 6 months ago and have seen astonishing results. We were quite amazed to see how quickly the kids have been able to use study apps and the benefits it has shown with regards to reinforcing what they've already learned inside the classroom. I would highly recommend study apps for any school.
Studyapps.co.za. Well, welcome. This is Conversations with Niki, and I am Niki Seberini, and we are indeed having such an interesting conversation, a memorable conversation, and a conversation that is so significant for all us South Africans, because we are commemorating 50 years of the Rivonia trial, and we're going to continue with this fascinating conversation. I would first like to just welcome our syndication partner listeners. Of course, that's Radio Today, that is Timoning Stereo 89.1, Eldo's FM, Chai FM, Kawi FM, West Coast FM, MC 90.3 FM in Plettenberg Bay, Knysna FM, Wild Coast FM, and Bay FM. And just a reminder that if you've missed part of the conversation, or if you'd like to hear the full conversation, do go to the website www.conversationswithniki, which is one word, and Niki is spelled Niki.co.za. I'm really so honored to have Ahmed Mohammed Kathrada, also known, he has been called Kathy, his nickname is Kathy, he's on the line. He is a South African politician, a former political prisoner and anti-apartheid activist, and he is relaying his story, his personal story of being part of the Rivonia trial. And Ahmed, just before the break, I said what stood out for you. Of course, you spoke about Nelson Mandela's speech, and then about being given life and not the death penalty. How real was that for you before that announcement, before you went into court to hear the judge proclaim what he would be sentencing you to? Of course, that judge, Dr. Curtis de Wet. Did you think there was a big possibility that you would be getting that death penalty?
Well, that was the belief among the accused, and I'm almost sure that was the belief among the lawyers as well. So much so that Madiba would not have, the court procedure at that time was the judge would say, accused number so-and-so, Mandela, have you got anything to say before I sentence you to death? That was court procedure. So in expectation of that, Madiba had prepared a 5 or so sentences on which he was going to address the court. Now those have been published, what he had prepared to say.
And the lawyers knew that this is what he had prepared.
I don't know whether he... But what I do know is there was this expectation among our lawyers and us that there was going to be a death sentence.
Well, we have got, unfortunately, the sound clip is not very good, Ahmed. So we've had to edit it and really just get the most significant part of what he said, his address in court. So these were the words, the very famous words of Nelson Mandela.
My Lord, I am the first accused. I hold a bachelor's degree in arts and practiced.
Okay, that's the wrong clip. We're going to look at the clip. There we go, the clip just before the sentence.
During my lifetime, I have dedicated my life to this struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal for which I hope to live for and to see realized. But my Lord, if it needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die.
And of course, those very famous words, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. And that's why I asked you, Ahmed, how prepared and how ready were you to die for this cause that you believed in? And obviously, when the judge announced that he would be giving you life, there must have been a great sense of relief. But life was life, I mean, that you were going to be spending the rest of your life in jail.
Well, when your expectation was death, life sentence was most welcome. As I say, there was a collective sigh of relief when the judge pronounced life.
I was chatting to Nick Wolpe of Lily's Leaf Farm, and he was saying that history is not told enough in South Africa today, that we're not recalling the days of the struggle and the days before the struggle, where we come from as South Africans. What is important for you, Ahmed, on a day like today when we are commemorating 50 years? What message do you want the South African people to walk away with?
Well, my view is that one of the challenges facing particularly our young people is ignorance of our history. And we're no longer surprised at this ignorance because we meet groups of people, we meet individuals, and even today I met a lot of people who are completely ignorant of and these were young people. So that is a very big challenge facing us today. People just don't know the past.
Well, that's why we're doing a show like we are today, Ahmed, and it is very important to continually tell the story. It's where we come from and who we are today. So I thank you very much for sharing your story on the show today. We do appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed Mohammed Kathrada, just sharing his story of the Rivonia trials. And Nick, I'd like to thank you very much for coming in and for setting the record straight in terms of the facts. And from now on, whenever I put facts together, I hope you don't mind, I'm going to is that okay? And that's Nick Wolpe. Thank you so much, Nick. I did start off the show saying that June is really a significant month because we are commemorating 50 years since the trial. And also we are looking at June being Youth Month. We're looking at the Soweto trials. We're looking at, the Soweto uprising and what happened all those years ago on the 16th of June, when in a series of protests led by high school students in South Africa, students in different parts of Soweto from Sowetan schools began to protest. And that obviously, as we know, was in response to the introduction of Afrikaans as the medium of instruction in local schools. And it was estimated that about 20,000 students took part in the protests. And they have said that they've reached a number saying that 176 students were killed and up to 700 were injured. And that is why in June we look at that day. And of course, Hector Peterson, when we all remember that picture so well, it's an iconic image of the 76 uprisings, where you have this photographer, Sam Nzima, who took a picture of this young little boy, Hector, who was dying in the arms of a man and with his sister running next to him. It's such an iconic image. And I'm hoping that we are going to speak to someone from the Hector Peterson Museum just to talk about that and the relevance of a day, because when public holidays come and go, it's lovely to have time off, but I think that it's so important to sit for a moment and think about why we take the time out and the significance of the day and looking at the students students who were so brave and who had such strength to stand up against an almighty crowd of policemen, armed policemen, and stand up for what they believed in. And that is certainly something that we need to recall and continue to tell those stories. But we are going to change tack just a little bit. I'm really, really happy to have Danny Kay in the studio because Danny does, he does lots of things all the time. It's not just about singing songs and entertaining people. He does incredible work. We were talking about Mandela. He had such a close association with Mandela and also with the charities and whatnot. So we decided to call him into the studio so he could give us his first-hand account of those experiences. So a singer, songwriter, record producer, Danny Kay, welcome to the studio. How's that?
It's a serious introduction, eh?
Too serious, Danny.
My head's not going to fit through the door on the way out.
So listen, what do you think? So Nick says and Ahmed says that we do not talk about the history of South Africa enough. What do you think? You're a young South African. You're a busy man.
I'm on the cusp, I'm not a born free, but neither am I a South African that lived, I guess, through those apartheid years. So, I had a recollection of Madiba being freed from prison as a young boy. I didn't really understand what he represented. I knew it was a big moment in our history. Then obviously as I got older, the appreciation for who he was and what he represented, really crystallized in my mind. But do we speak enough about ourselves, our history? I think the danger is that as time goes on, we'll forget to tell the stories, about the Madibas, the Kathradas, the Tambos, the Hanis. And I guess there needs to be a strong emphasis on the kids that are the born frees to kind of appreciate this history, because it was presented to me only because I saw it and I was intrigued by it. But, the history of these people and what they've done for us really needs to be, I guess, communicated to the youth of tomorrow and today.
So Youth Day for you?
Youth
Is it
Day,
just about waking up a little bit later?
No, it's normally about entertaining. I'm always busy on Youth Day doing shows and concerts. It's really a day where music is used as a tool to bring people together and communicate to them, what it means to be South African, the importance of a day like Youth Day. So music plays an amazing part in providing a platform to talk about serious things. Everyone wants to dance and sing, and the youth, if you're being realistic, are maybe more interested in having a good time than about serious issues. So if you can combine clever things, like entertainment and a message, I've found that's a winning formula.
I like what you have to say. Speak in the language that the youth today understand. It's like rap. Isn't rap like, I don't know, poetry of the Romantics?
Absolutely.
I don't know.
These guys are the Shakespearean, literacy geniuses of today, which is why when it came time for me to do to own my own social responsibility project with the Shout Foundation, we used music as our communication tool, and we realized that it could raise a lot of money to do some very serious things, and I'd seen the precedent of the We Are the Worlds and those sorts of things be so successful. So it's undeniable.
You and Kabelo were just recently doing something for Mandela Day. You opened a container library in Soweto.
Yeah,
these
are container libraries on kind of like, I say, they're container libraries on steroids and LSD, because they're container libraries, but they 4 or 5 of them welded together to make structures that aren't dark and dingy. And we worked with some great creatives from Network BBDO and the Architects of Justice, and they're colorful. And our theory was that, if you put a kid in a container library and it's made to feel like a prison, you increase the chance of him landing up in one. But if you give someone a really inspirational space and color and books that can free their minds, then you got a chance of shaping their future. So we're thinking about crime fighting very differently than just bullets and guns and stuff like that.
Wonderful. Okay, so Danny, just for a moment, I would like to just go back to Youth Day, and I want to talk to Ali Shlongwane, who is the Deputy Director of Museums and Galleries and former head and Chief Curator of the Hector Peterson Memorial and Museum. So, Ali, hi, and thanks so much for joining us.
Yes, good day, and thanks for having me.
Ali, if you can just tell us, I just spoke about this iconic picture of Hector Peterson, this dying young boy in the arms of a young man, and really that picture is synonymous with the Soweto uprisings and what happened on the day. And with our guests on the show today, we're talking about just how important it is to tell the story of all South Africans and to continue to tell that story. I have Danny Kay in the studio. He says that the youth of today need to be perhaps be told that story in a different way, using music or using a way that they understand. How do you feel? And you were the former head and chief curator of the Hector Peterson Memorial and Museum. How do you get the youth involved in what happened in the past so that they can continue telling those stories?
Yes. Well, I think it has to be, or we have done it in two ways, really. First, by acknowledging that the past is still part of us today, and therefore there are a number of reasons why young people need to reflect, need to dialogue, need to engage in programs that address the past that is still with us today. Of course, there is also that view that for a people to move forward, they need to appreciate where they come from. And indeed, the Hector Peterson Museum, which really tells the story of the contribution of young people to the liberation struggle in South Africa, and tells it from their point of view, does attempt to get them engaged. And it has done so over the last 10 years in two major ways, really. That the design of the exhibit itself, was is a mixed medium. It used audio-visual text so that through orality you can reach out to a number of people across generations. It attempted, but I would say probably not with success, to also grapple with the issue of language. How do you reach out to a community that speaks more than 12 languages? I think it's a challenge that will be with us for years. However, what we then did at Hector Peterson is that the museum itself reached out to young people. For instance, there is an active youth forum at the museum, which attracts young people not only to interact with the story, but in addition to interacting with the narrative, they also express themselves either through poetry or through creative writing or through discussions and debates. It is in that context that we have been able to reach out to young people.
That's wonderful. Ali, I have to ask you one more question before I do say goodbye. That picture that we all know so well.
Yeah.
Hector Peterson is identified in the picture. The young girl walking next to him was his sister.
Yeah.
Who was the young man who was holding Hector Peterson, and does anyone ever know what happened to him?
Well, first let me indicate that the young person who is carrying Hector was Mbuyisa Makubu. He was no longer a learner or a student at the time. He had just completed matric a year before, but found himself in that situation where he had to assist a young child who had been hurt as a result of the student protest and the reaction of the police. His family, the mother is late now, interacted with the museum. She also appeared in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. However, one can safely say Mbuyisa Makubu is, as of today, still not accounted for. He is one of many other young people who were assumed either to have left the country. Some were confirmed to have left the country, but have never been back to their parents, alive or no longer alive.
That's terrible.
And his family continues to be, I think, affected by that experience. And there is a belief amongst different communities that tragedy is easier to deal with when you have had an opportunity to deal either with the remains of your loved one or to know where they are or what has happened. But with people who had disappeared, the trauma lingers longer, I think. And that is the challenge the city, the museum continues to grapple with in attempting to interact with the family and other families who do come actually because the names of their loved ones are appearing in the museum, but no one as yet can account for.
I think that's so important, just looking at the individuals and how many individuals were affected. We look at the broader picture on a day like Youth Day, and I talk about the numbers of students who were killed, and when you just go in and you look at the families that were affected, as you say, how many students have disappeared and their parents have never heard from them. So thank you for bringing that, Ali. Thank you so much for coming onto the show. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ali Shlongwane, Deputy Director of Museums and Galleries, and also the former head and chief curator of the Hector Peterson Memorial and Museum. So, Danny, I mean, that picture, you grew up seeing that picture. I mean, did you ever think about the people in the picture? We become so desensitized, don't we?
Yeah, I mean,
we can become so desensitized.
I mean, it's harrowing to think that these people. You can't really appreciate, I think, what went on back then, at least as a young person, what the youth back then was subjected to, and how difficult it was to live in this country. And, we take so much for granted, I think, as young people, today, the freedoms we enjoy. But the youth have always been a very, powerful force, I think, around the world. They shape so much. So, it's a terrible photo, but I think inspiring to think, the tipping point that happened in the country after that. Speaking of youth, you're going to be bringing a youth into the world pretty soon. Yeah, I am.
And doesn't that change everything? Well, you don't know yet, actually. You're still on. Listen, Danny, you're still on that side of the wall.
I'm not getting a Father's Day. I'm not getting a Father's Day present yet.
How far are you?
No, a few weeks, literally. But it is interesting. The sense of being a dad and the responsibility that comes with it, and kind of looking after, or the potential of looking after something else other than yours. I only ever had a dog, so that was my experience.
This is a change. It'll be a slight shift.
I'm sure it's going to be a major shift, but I've never been more excited. I really am. I kind of feel I'm mature enough for fatherhood. I was always a big kid. I'm still a bit of a kid, but...
Listen, remain the big kid. Because that's what's great about fathers, is they can still be kids with their babies, with their kids.
I think I'm going to enjoy the video games more than him. But,
you can't wait, because now you can play it. You can go into the toy shop and actually buy the toys you've been eyeing out for years.
I've already been looking at cars and planes and, it's great.
So it's a boy.
It's a boy, yeah.
It's a boy.
Yeah. Okay. So very exciting times for me. But it's going to be an interesting experience, I think.
Well, I was watching your video because you've got a new album out.
Yes.
And this is one of the singles off the album.
Yeah, we just released it.
That's it. And there I see your preggy wife.
Yeah,
in the video, looking magnificent, and I just thought that's fantastic.
Under duress, she came in the video, but I was like, listen.
She looks great.
I was like, listen, A, you look great, and B, I want some evidence that can exist of how you looked and this moment before you gave birth. So she wasn't very happy with me. Kicking and screaming to get
she will be happy, I promise
into hair and makeup and get her in the video. But I love that she's in it. And my dog's in it.
And your doggy's in it.
Yeah, and my dog.
What is that, a Boston
Terrier? My two favorite things
in the world.
My dog and my wife.
What is your dog? Is that a Boston Terrier?
He's a French bulldog.
Oh, a French bulldog.
So he's quite an unusual looking guy. But, he's on the front of my album cover. He's really developed a bit of a personality and a profile himself. So his name's Banksy.
Banksy.
He's very famous.
But the video is great.
Thank you.
Who put that video together? It's a great video, I must say.
I didn't really know how that video was going to turn out. I found this very talented director from Cape Town, and he told me the brief of what he was going to do, and I didn't really get it. But sometimes you find a creative person who you just have to believe in. So, I trust that this guy knew what he was doing. And I actually only realized what the video was going to be about, with things vanishing and appearing, when I saw it last week. But the response has been phenomenal. I'm really excited about it.
I mean, you've had great success so far with the album. And is this a well, this song definitely,
yes.
You're trying something completely new, because you're R&B. I mean, house isn't really your game. So what made you decide to go in that direction?
I've jumped, I think, in and out of genres my whole career. I've never been scared to, work with people from different backgrounds, different genres to me. So that always excited me. I mean, going back to being a young person in South Africa, I think one of the amazing benefits of living in this country is just the opportunity to interact in close proximity to so many people that are different from you. We live around one another, and you have to have the bravery to not be scared of that. And my parents always taught me, don't be scared to work with someone from a different background to you. So it's always been a very natural thing for me. So jumping genres is kind of the same theme. It's just experiencing or being brave enough to open your mind up.
Okay, so let's talk about Personal Paradise.
Yes.
So you teamed up with
Donald and Heavy K.
Heavy K.
Yeah. So Donald's he just arrived on the scene a couple of years ago. He's been a huge phenomenon success. And Heavy K, the other guy I did the track with, has emerged as this big producer. Produced his first hit in a shack in PE, that landed up becoming one of the biggest songs in the country, and that was like about a year ago. So he's also been this huge success overnight. And I met him at an award show, and we joked that he was my long-lost brother. I was Danny K, he's Heavy K. And we said, look, the family's got to get together and we've got to do something. And Donald and I have been, kind of flirting with working together. So we said, here's a tripartite agreement that we could reach. And that was it.
Hopefully you'll have better success in other tripartite
agreements.
Who wrote it?
I wrote it with Donald.
And produced?
Yeah, Heavy K produced it. So listen, it's 13 years of making music. I still love it very much. I'm very lucky to do what I love. I couldn't be happier.
Fantastic. We're going to play out with the song.
Oh, cool.
Personal Paradise, Danny
awesome.
K, with Heavy K and with the crooner Donald. And listen, lots of new beginnings, Danny. We wish you all the very, very best.
Thank you.
The new little baby on its way.
Thank you for having me.
Enjoy every moment. So fantastic of you for having you on the show, Danny K. And thank you so much for tuning in. Conversations with Niki. It has been great, and I'm looking so forward to being with you same time next week. For me, Niki Seberini. Goodbye. Conversations with Niki was brought to you by studyapps.co.za, South Africa's leading education app for tablets.